This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.
Welcome to Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. I am your host, Corey Nathan, and I am so grateful to have a place to talk about important stuff. You know, we talk about faith, we talk about politics, and there's a lot going on in our world right now. And I'm just really grateful to have folks that are accomplished, mostly people that are come in goodwill and good faith, and we get to talk about it together. It is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group, a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. And hey, I need you to leave a review, especially on Apple. Good or bad, Apple dominates the podcast market. And if we don't have enough reviews on Apple, we just don't get ranked where we should. So look us up anywhere by typing in Talkin' Politics, TALKIN apostrophe politics, and our purple logo should come up. So again, talking without the G, and politics. And of course, tell a friend so you can argue with them and then listen to some more episodes of this and figure out how to argue even better. Anyway, all that helps get the word out so more people can participate in the conversation like the one we're having today with, let me put it this way. Screen door slams, Lisa's dress sways. Like a vision, she dances. I've never sung on this podcast, by the way. So why did I introduce my new friend, Lisa Camooso Miller, that way? Why did I do that?
I love you even more for it, though.
I've never sung. I used to sing like Sting. I used to be able to sing really well. Now I sing like Johnny Cash if I'm lucky.
Oh, that's not true. You sound pretty good, Corey.
Oh, thank you, dear. So Lisa Camooso, she really is my new friend. Lisa Camooso Miller has been a notable communications leader for over 20 years in local, state, and federal government posts, political campaigns, and committees, as well as advocacy organizations. She is the host and producer of a really good podcast. I've just been listening. I first came across it when I was doing research for a guest that we had on this show. It's called The Friday Reporter. Really easy to look up. She's had some great guests on there. Lisa is a partner at Reset Public Affairs, and prior to that position, she served as the head of media affairs for the American Coalition for Clean Coal Electricity. She was previously deputy communications director for the U.S. Secretary of Commerce and the U.S. Speaker of the House. She served as head of communications for the Republican National Committee in 2007. And prior to her time in Washington, D.C., Lisa served under two New Jersey governors, where she participated in the recovery and rebuilding efforts following the attacks on September 11th. And most notably, as I've already indicated, Lisa is a Jersey girl. So nice to have you.
My most famous accolade and my most favorite.
Absolutely. We were just, before I hit record, I was just listening to Jersey Girl, the Bruce, a great rendition, live rendition. So my heart is a flutter. So
I love it.
You grew up near Bricktown or no, you actually grew up near Asbury Park, right?
One town over from Asbury Park. Yes. My dad, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my grandparents, they were all, and some of them still are there. There's a few left in Asbury Park. Of course, the race riots and all the things that happened in the late 60s really hit the cities in our state and really all across the country so hard that there was a big migration for a lot of immigrants to move west from where some of those communities were really challenged. And that's really sort of my story. Of course, I went to school in Ocean Township, which is, like I said, it's a exit 7A off the Parkway, not that far from Great Adventure, where I know you probably spent a little bit of your youth.
I did.
And went really far away to go to college. I went to Trenton State. And was at State for 4 years and worked in the Capitol, worked for two governors. I worked for Christy Todd Whitman. And if you remember, Corey, I worked for also the Senate president because the way the Constitution in New Jersey was written at the time, if the governor vacates the chair or leaves town, the Senate president acts as the governor. So Christy Whitman became EPA administrator.
EPA commissioner, yeah.
And Don DeFrancesco, who was the longest serving Republican Senate president, became the acting governor. And during that time, he was the acting governor for a full 12 months. 9/11 happened. And so I was literally his traveling body person, like carrying his
Tic
briefing
Tacs
materials and
and yeah.
stuff, and all those things, and there we were. So it was like probably the most life-changing moments. Like if I have to look back on something and say like that really was a moment, it's how I got to Washington, and I swore I was coming for 2 years, Corey, and I've been here for 22.
How about that? So take me back a little bit. You said you went to Trenton State and, did some more studies after that. At Trenton State, what is it called now? College in
New Jersey.
Yeah, yeah. So did you decide, you graduated from Ocean High School, and then did you decide before you got to college that you wanted to study government, political theory? Like what, did you have any sense of this, or is this something that you came to discover through your college years?
So I don't, not even sure how it happened, but when I went to Wayside School in the 5th grade, we moved from Oceanport. I somehow found myself elected to be the vice president of my 5th grade class with my good friend Jeff, who was the president. And all of that time, I went to middle school, and there was not a lot of student government there. When I went to high school, I had a friend who was a senior at the time, and she said, campaigning actually is really helpful and really can be great for you to run for class officer. So I went to the little, you remember all these little sort of vendors that we had in New Jersey, but there was a small like candy vendor that I went to, and I bought 5-cent lollipops, and I bought 300 of them. And I literally stapled a little a note to them, vote Lisa Camooso. And I handed those lollipops out every year for 4 years of high school. And I loved it. I got to shake hands with people that like I wouldn't ordinarily check in with. Everybody loves a lollipop, especially in high school. You could definitely mask the bad decisions you were making when you were hitting the bathroom, like and then you pop a lollipop from Lisa Camooso. So, so I always really enjoyed that part of politics, not the, defend your honor and be on the good side, but the whole like meeting up and talking to people about what they cared about. And I went to school at Trenton State, and I was a communication and theater major. So I did not major in political science. I loved the art of communicating. I will never forget my first public speaking class. Dr. Paul Fry was my professor, and he charged us 25 cents for any time we said the word or like. At the end of my first public speech in college, I owed him like $4.25.
That's actually pretty good.
That's real money for a college kid in 1991, though. So I never forgot it, Corey. And so honestly, like I love the people part of politics. I love connecting with people, working with them. And so as much as I've always been in political communication, it's a marriage of the two. And I count myself very lucky, because plenty of people go to college and don't necessarily end up in that work space. So I love what I do.
Have you ever been early enough on a campaign and close enough to a campaign, like perhaps Governor Whitman's second term, where you were doing the diners, the Manalapan diner, from going diner to diner, like they do. Absolutely. We all watch it on TV with Iowa, but I would imagine you go in county to county in gubernatorial campaigns as well.
Absolutely. I ran a race in 1999 for the New Jersey Assembly. And in the assembly, the way it works is that there's a senator for each district, and there's 2 assembly people for each district in New Jersey. And that's the way that's structured. And I ran the race in 1999 for my home district where I lived. And I went to everything. What really cracked me up, Corey, and you know this best because you're from where I am from. On any given day, you can walk into the diner and run into either someone you're related to or someone you went to school with. And I used to laugh because my mother was in the teachers union, and she used to get the mail at home for the Democratic candidates. Mm-hmm. And then I would fax them in to the coordinated headquarters for all campaigns. And it would say Camooso on it, but it would not be my name, and it would be for the opposition. And they said, I love the most that I get all of the opposition mail with your name, with your last name on it, knowing full well it's arriving right in your house.
Yeah.
But that politics and that connection, like meeting with people and hearing people out, it can be frustrating because people do have great concerns. But I also feel like, too, that hearing them out and then being able to go to the state capitol and then deliver on that promise is, to me, I mean, it's what it's what we grew up knowing politics to be. It has evolved and changed so much over time. And it's to our detriment, I think, as a country. But to me, that's why I got into it, because of, sitting down and chatting with people and getting to know what it is they need, what kinds of things that elected officials can help solve for them.
Yeah. Now, you said your mom, my parents were in the teachers union as well, but they were in New York City. Drove in, 45 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on the day. My mom was a longtime teacher in Staten Island, 35 years. My dad was inner city. He was a teacher early part of his career, then a guidance counselor, and ultimately helped to start the conflict resolution program for the chancellor of schools. So we have a lot in common there. Longtime Democrats because they were good union people. But I found that, and I'm just a little bit older than you, so I found that I was more drawn to the politics of Alex P. Keaton than my parents. I was more the Alex P. Keaton in my family. I was a little bit more conservative. And then especially the last governor, when I still lived in Jersey, was Governor Whitman. She ultimately came on the show. At what point did you find yourself gravitating? But that was a certain kind of Republican, by the way. It's a very different Republican than what's happening actually right now as we speak in the House. They're voting for us. So what drew you to Republican politics?
I think growing up, my elected state senator was a great man, Joe Palea. He himself was a teacher for many, many, many years. I had known him from the time that I was a very young student of politics, and just admired the work that he did. He was so well regarded in our community as someone that just sort of saw around the corner and saw opportunity for people. And he was an elected Republican from Monmouth County, New Jersey. And so that's really what drew me into the party, because of that great desire and need and want he had for making sure that people got taken care of and people were, well cared for through the legislative process and through all those means. So that's how I kind of fell into it. What's funny though, Corey, is that fast forward, I'm working as the communications director for the Republican National Committee in 2007. And I'm working for a man named Mel Martinez, who is a U.S. Senator from Florida. And typically, as part of my job, I invite other either thought leaders or newsmakers to have lunch and connect with our spokesperson for the party. So it's Mel Martinez, U.S. Senator, and Britt Hume from Fox News.
Oh, wow.
And I'm a kid from New Jersey, Asbury Park, New Jersey. And I'm asked to join the lunch. And I'm thinking, my father always used to joke, like, you can catch a fool when they're talking. So my approach to this lunch was to diligently eat my salad, whatever I had. And Senator Martinez gets called away for a vote. So Martinez has to leave.
Oh, no.
And this kid, 20, 30, how old was I? 30 some years old, early 30s, sitting across from Britt Hume, gets asked the same question. How does a girl from New Jersey become a Republican? And that's really when I got back to all of the foundations of what I'd known. I told him my story about Senator Joe Palea. I told him my story about how I had worked in local politics. And that's the community that I grew up in, was supported by great, strong Republican candidates who were pro small business, who were pro, all of the things that I fundamentally believed in, right? Making sure that government did what it needed to do to support you, but also stayed out of the way. And so me, the kid from New Jersey, sitting across from Britt Hume, to this day, I still laugh thinking, I don't know how that happened, but life is a lot about circumstance, right? And being in an opportunity like that, I look back now and I say, well, it all worked out for the best.
That's the expression. Better to remain silent and let people wonder if you're a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt. I've done that many, many times. Before we move on, I wanted to tell you about something else that's important. Money. Specifically your money. In all seriousness, I wanted to tell you about my advisor and my friend, George Meza. George runs Meza Wealth Management. And with George, it's not just about money. It's about helping us manage our present and plan for our future. And unlike a lot of other firms out there, George and I actually have a relationship. He knows me, he knows my family, and I know his wonderful family. I also know his firm and the incredible team he's put together, from his chief investment officer to some of the other great people in his office, like Jessica, their head of operations, that are always there to help me and with all aspects of our portfolio. You see, the thing is, I got a lot going on. I guess we all got a lot going on, and I don't have the time to watch our investments all day, every day. And even if I did, I don't have the experience and expertise that George's team collectively has. So we get the entire Mesa Wealth Management team, all their expertise and all their integrity. And again, it's based on George knowing me personally, knowing my goals, and even the kind of risk that's appropriate for me to take, which, by the way, could change from one season to the next. And they're on top of all of that. So if you want George Mesa and Mesa Wealth Management to be on your team, just visit their website, mesawealth.com. That's MEZA wealth.com, www.mesawealth.com. And that will also be in our show notes, so you can check that. And now, back to our show. So when you started to develop an expertise as a communications person, how did that come about? Was it something that just kind of organically emerged as you were on more campaigns and part of more staffs? How did that all come about?
I think a lot of it is exactly as you've said. I mean, a lot of it is experience, right? I worked for the acting governor of New Jersey, who also was a gubernatorial candidate for about 6 months of the time that I worked with him. So we were on the campaign trail. I found myself in the back of the room often taking notes about how speeches were unfolding, what was working, what was not working, and identifying sort of ways to connect with the audience in a way that was really of interest to me. I thought that was really cool. But when I moved to Washington, as you well know, a kid from New Jersey, we're not necessarily known as being a bright red bastion of Republican support. So there were only spots for a few of us in the Bush administration. So when I arrived on the scene, I was lucky enough to be a White House liaison for the U.S. Department of Commerce. And I did that for 1 year, which was the best opportunity of my lifetime, because that's a job where you're constantly interviewing candidates for various appointed positions inside the building. And I was lucky enough to meet the soon-to-be new director of public affairs as he was coming through, and I was shepherding his paperwork and helping him through the process of getting, an appointment into the administration. And when he looked up, he said, "I have no deputy in this office." And so he came back to the White House liaison's office and he asked my counterpart, what great communications background person do we have like in the stable? And she said, I have to tell you the truth. Lisa, who just processed all your paperwork, she's from New Jersey. She's actually a communications professional. And he said, "You're hired." And it was like the luckiest opportunity of my life. But I look back on that and I said, "What made you think that I was the right person for the job?" He said, "Of all the people that I met in government as I'm coming through the processes, you were the one that just said, even if there was an obstacle, you said, we're going to figure it out." And he said, "I love that. I love being that kind of, taking that kind of approach." But that goes back to the way New Jersey is. Like, we've always got a guy. We've always got a way to figure it out, right? I mean, if your car breaks down, I got a guy. If you need a pizza Friday night, I got a guy. Like, and I don't mean that to be sort of vernacular and silly about the way that New Jersey does their thing. But I do love that it's very much about your connections with people. And that goes back to my original point and how I kind of got into this in the first place. So that's really how I got lucky enough to get my first break. And lucky enough that he and I actually worked so well together that I then followed him to the Speaker's office. I worked for the Speaker of the House from 2005 until 2007.
So remind me, who was Speaker? So that was pre-Pelosi.
Dennis Hastert.
Oh, Hastert. The infamous Hastert rule, which we could use a little bit more of right now, right?
The accidental speaker, which very well might be what happens when we finally arrive here in Washington, D.C. on whoever the next candidate is for that role. You know what? By the way, since you're from Jersey, I'm rooting for some kind of summit between the heads of the Problem Solvers Caucus. You can't nominate Josh Gottheimer. He's the Democrat, because it is, albeit slight, it is a slightly majority Republican House. So you take from Pennsylvania 1, Fitzpatrick. So you take Brian Fitzpatrick, the Republican co-head of the Problem Solvers Caucus. And, you might have to give some things to your Democratic colleagues, but actually treating them like the loyal opposition and your colleagues as opposed to arch enemies. I don't know, that maybe we'll come out of the wilderness and figure our way through that. I sure hope so. And, there was a glimmer of hope just a few weeks back before this nonsense happened with sending McCarthy packing. The way that the continuing resolution got passed here in Washington was through a coalition of support with Republicans and Democrats to get it passed and out. And that, of course, was ultimately what sent the speaker home, or at least out of the speaker's office. And to me, that was a glimmer of hope. Like, that's the way we used to do it. We used to work together. It should be a bipartisan agreement that our job as members of Congress is to keep the government functioning and open, right? And so I am hopeful, as you say. I mean, the problem solvers to me are the kind of reasonable voice in a time when reasonable is not necessarily what we're working with.
Yeah. Yeah. So, wow. Did you ever like pinch yourself and say, what the heck? Like, how the hell did I get here? Like
every single day.
Wow.
Yeah. Every single day. And the day that it stops becoming like, I can't believe I get to do this for a living, is the day that I go home and I don't go back to it. Cause I mean, really, when you come to Washington, D.C., as much as, you see the iconic photos of the dome and the monument, the truth of it is as you're driving into the building and parking your car right outside of the dome, it still takes your breath away every day you do it, like, wow, I get to do this job every day. And you have to remember that the job is bigger than you.
My buddy has been living there since around 1997. Yeah, he went to law school in 93 or 94. That must be it. He went to 94, came up from Miami in, I think, 97, worked for the government. But he's still an attorney there. Great guy. Just a wonderful, wonderful human being with a wonderful family. My buddy, Steve Cohen. Every time I go to visit him, I find myself just walking the mall. Not the mall, not like the, Freehold Raceway Mall, but like the actual mall with the Washington Monument.
The National Mall, of course.
Yeah.
And it's still, every year there's something new that's added. There's a new Smithsonian. There's a new monument to something that we should all be remembering, especially in these times when things are so tumultuous and kind of off the wall, like we'd never thought they would be.
Yeah.
You walk the mall and it does remind you that like, this is all a lot bigger than each of us,
Yeah.
And it's a great city. It really is a great city. It's evolved and changed so much since I got here. I used to have to get on the train and go to New York to get a great Italian meal. They're getting better.
I'm in California, so I haven't had decent bagels since the last time I was in New York, let alone pizza. Good sushi, really good sushi. So if you're ever out here, I'll introduce you to really good sushi. I'll get you some really good Mexican food, but they don't know bagels from a hole in a wall. Like a hole in a bagel,
It's the toll my friends take. So when my friends come to visit, regardless who it is from New Jersey, they always call ahead of time and say, "What's your order?" And they'll stop at the Hot Bagel Bakery in Oakhurst, and they'll grab me 2 dozen bagels. And my freezer is, slice them up and freeze them up, and they're good to go. At one point, though, one of my teenagers was like helping herself to one every day, and I was like, "What? Wait, hold up a second. The bakery is not in the freezer."
Right. That's funny. I have to admit, like one of the first things I'll do once we land in Jersey, so sometimes we'll fly into Philly, sometimes we'll fly into Newark, is I got to hit a Wawa.
Oh, yeah.
There's nothing like Wawa, especially in the coffee.
The Wawa hoagie it's a hangover fixer. Talk about, you could have a pork roll, egg and cheese, or you could have a Wawa hoagie. Any of those will fix whatever ails you.
Yeah. So speaking of relationships, I am absolutely in awe of who you've been able to bring on the Friday Reporter. Like just, looking at the last few months, at the beginning of this year, Dana Perrin, okay. Could we geek out about podcasting for a second?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Is it relationship based that you're able to get such, and feel free to like list some of your favorites, but is it relationship based that you're able to get such impressive guests on the Friday Reporter?
When you, the funny part about this town is my social group, my social set of friends is political communicators and reporters. And that's grown over time. It wasn't like that when I first arrived in town, but being here 22 years, when you work in the speaker's office, Jim Mills from Fox News comes and sits. If you don't call him back quick enough, he comes and sits at your desk until you're ready to give him a comment about what it is that's happening. The speaker has to that day. And so because the Capitol is so, it's like a college campus, you run into your friends all the time, that I got to know some of the most remarkable journalists in the country. And so through those relationships, every single one of my early guests, and even now to this day, Corey, even with you, I ask for a recommendation. I always say, who should I talk to next? And so of the 126 episodes that I've had on the show, I've got a list of another probably 135 other people that I'm eventually going to reach out to. And not everybody says yes, just like anything else. You know how this is, they've got a conflict. I had one person say, like, I've got a little kid and I've got a demanding job. Check in with me in 6 months. And I always do. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But the best part about some of these relationships is that they do tend to build off of one another. So when I talk to Paul Kane from the Washington Post about January 6th, he will recommend someone not in our small circle of friends that I know. He'll try to recommend somebody that's new and young, that's an up and comer that maybe I haven't had a chance to meet yet. And some of those conversations are the most fun because those are journalists then, Corey, that I can, when I have a client who cares about an issue that's in their beat or in their sort of their area of expertise, I'll check in with them, and that too is also a nice way to introduce myself to them, give them a little bit of promotion for who they are. Cause a lot of these guys are working on clicks and awareness of who they are too. But it makes it that much more fun because some of these young journalists are dynamos. I mean, they're so bright and smart, and it's so fun to watch them grow and expand and just become, names of their own that ordinarily you wouldn't necessarily be paying attention to.
Speaking of which, one of my favorite conversations over the last few months was a rising star reporter, kind of an old school reporter, but Mariana, her name is Mariana Alfaro with the Washington Post. She's just incredibly inquisitive, sharp, creative, resourceful. I learned a lot just from talking to her, because she went to school whatever. I don't want to say how many decades after, my contemporaries were in school, but just hearing her perspective on how to do the news, and part of it is just really encouraging because it gives me hope that there's a future to this profession that you and I both care about so much, Lisa. So I bet some of your best friends are journalists.
Some of my very best friends are journalists. What's funny about being, and this may be true of where you are in California too, because I know you've got lots of industries out where you are. I used to joke when I took my kids on field trips through school, when I was sitting next to my friends that also had kids in the class who were journalists and lobbyists and maybe even an elected somebody or other. I used to say we should maybe figure out how to expense this, right? Like, let's order a meal for everyone and call this a meeting, because this is as big as Washington, D.C. seems from the outside looking in. It actually really is a small town. So it amazes me how much there's an intersection between Republicans and Democrats and lobbyists and legislators and journalists. It's really neat. And I feel like too, it makes my kids better for that too, because they have a better appreciation for the work that people do and they understand it better.
Yeah. So how did you learn the podcast medium? Because it's a really excellent show. It's well done, well produced. The conversations are really engaging and fun. And, listen, sometimes you're talking about, so what do we wear now post pandemic or the makeup, so sometimes you have these great subjects. How did you learn the medium? And then how do you curate what you're going to talk about over the course of the next several weeks?
It evolves over time. For sure. There was a lot of YouTube in the early days. I mean, I started the show in March of 21. So we'd been home for a year. And I have a business that really requires me to be out and about, shaking hands and visibility in a way that I'm not particularly comfortable on social media, just humble bragging about nonsense, check me out on TV or check me out over here. It's just not something that I'm really comfortable doing. So I started to think about what kind of interesting content could I provide that would be good for people to see and would be relevant. And I texted a friend of mine who's a journalist now. He actually is the founder of Pluribus, which is a more state-focused publication than national publication. His name is Reed Wilson. He was a columnist for the Hill newspaper. He's been at a dozen fantastic other news outlets, but he now is the head honcho at pluribus.us. And what Reed's concept is that whatever happens in the states ultimately ends up being what bubbles up in Washington, D.C. And so he wanted to chase those issues as they are emerging in your local community and my local community and aggregate them and then help share them with people that are paying attention to how those issues are going to make their way to Washington. And so I called Reed and I said, if I were to do a show, a podcast, would you do the show? And he said, yes. I said, and look, after 3 weeks, when nobody but my father listens to it, we can laugh over a beer. That wasn't it fun when Lisa tried to start a podcast. Fortunately, that was not the case. But I had asked advice of my other journalist friends who are radio people. What soundboard should I use? What microphone should I buy? What kind of headset should I wear? And by wear, I mean use to hear. But so all of that to say, like all of those early pieces of advice came from journalist friends of mine. And then I just went on YouTube and I thought, how do I do this thing? How do I start a podcast? I used a platform that helped me get, to all of the platforms, helped me get certified through Apple. And boy, the day I got on Apple was like, I was ready to throw a party. I was so excited.
Hallelujah.
You feel like you've arrived, right? Because you can get yourself on Spotify, you can get yourself on all the other platforms, but Apple has a little bit of a lag time as opposed to all the rest.
Yeah.
But so, to me, it's constantly evolving. It's constantly changing. But I've taught myself. And so far, I still do all the editing. I still do all the social around it. Sooner or later, I hope someday to get an intern that wants to help my older than 50-year-old self figure out how to do some more social on it. But you asked about how I could come up with the ideas, Corey. And the truth of it is that in the beginning of the fall of this year, I was feeling like my journalist friends were so covered up and so incredibly busy with, we're all paying attention to the news. It's breathless. Every single day, something gigantic happens. It's not even like, bus catches dog or, the silly things that typically we used to watch on the nightly news. It's big stuff, right? My goodness, it's Hamas and Israel. It's all of these really just huge issues that are all consuming. And with news media being as busy as it is and as challenged as it is every day, it made it even more difficult for me to be able to lock in my guests as quickly as I would want them. But also, too, while that was also happening, I was getting more and more pitches from people saying, Lisa, you've got to meet this great lobbyist female friend of mine who just produced this Herculean legislative action that nobody could have done except her because she's just so well sourced and so well regarded. Would you have her on the show? You bet. Had her on the show. It was so fun that I thought, why am I limiting myself just to journalists?
Yeah.
So I put up a note and I, sort of let the universe know that I was open to pitches. Here comes Corey Nathan. Here comes my guest in 2 weeks is an author who wrote a book about, raising kids to be respectful in politics because he had worked in politics like I had. So there's all of these other cool conversations that are really a lot like what you and I've been doing for most of our life anyway, and that's networking.
Yeah.
So as I started to think about the fall, I started to think a lot of the coaching I do is how do you look? How do you appear? How do you make sure your messages get through? And that always comes back to appearance, more for women than for men. But that's why I asked my friend Margaret Lilly to do my show a couple of weeks ago, because I was like, nobody can figure out what to wear. COVID has us all in sweatpants, and sweatpants are frowned upon if you're in the U.S. Capitol or really just about anywhere.
By the way, I was thinking of you this morning when I put on this shirt. I'm like, oh, Lisa's gonna see me, and I better put on at least a decent shirt that there's semi-irons and.
It's so funny, but it is the kind of thing that it just it's less about how you appear and more about erasing distractions. So people are forced to hear the words you say out loud. And so it is really a communication tactic. I had a friend on who was on last week. People always say, when I train people for media training, men and women, I always say you absolutely have to sit in the green room. You have to sit in the makeup chair just for a few minutes to not appear to be having run from your last meeting into the TV studio, because you'll remember, the most famous time that people talk about is the debate between Richard Nixon and JFK.
Yeah. One had sweat over his lip and,
because one said no thank you to his makeup and the other did, and had just come back from, and so Brooke gave me a whole rundown of politics and makeup, but also too, the news is so heavy right now, Corey, that I feel like having a lighter conversation from time to time is also really fun, and it appeals to different parts of the people that listen into my show. Some guys, I'll even put a note in my show notes to say, guys, tune in to minute 14 to find out what you need to wear to the office, so you don't have to listen to all the conversation about how to do your hair. But also, too, friends of mine, who are in the professional space, who aren't necessarily caring about journalism, have sent me notes offline and told me that they really appreciated it. Because the truth is that they had sort of lost track of what it was they're supposed to be wearing to the office after having been home for all those months.
Okay, so I have two follow-up questions to some of the things that you just said. One is very serious, but it might not be your bailiwick. The other one, not so serious. But so I know that President Biden isn't everybody's cup of tea, but if you're paying closer attention than just the headlines or whatever your favorite channel is saying, one of the remarkable things about the administration is that a lot of the biggest pieces of legislation have been bipartisan. So, whether it's Cornyn leading the negotiation, Republican senator from Texas leading negotiations on the first piece of gun legislation that passed in 30 years, or whether it's the most conservative Democrat in the Senate from West Virginia leading negotiations on, they called it the Inflation Reduction Act, but it had to do with some health care in there, some energy in there, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So the reason I bring it up is, or you mentioned when McCarthy was still Speaker, I thought one of his best moments was when Biden said, no, you and I are going to negotiate one-on-one. He didn't have other Democratic, leaders in the Oval with him. He brought McCarthy as a leader of the Republicans from the House, and then he figured it out together last spring to avoid the financial cliff. But with the bigger pieces of legislation, are you privy to what kind of lobbying, what kind of negotiations, how do those conversations go? How do you get a bipartisan infrastructure bill, something as massive as that, through the House and the Senate and ultimately on the president's desk for signature?
With something that significant, that big, it hits every district all across the country. I mean, really everybody, Republican, Democrat, in between, non-voting, voting, immigrant, you mentioned, I mean, everybody is using the roads and the bridges and the infrastructure in the US. And that issue is one that people can come together on. And I do think that the more we find ourselves in this hugely and widely divided country, we are still reminded that the only way to get real impactful legislation done is through cooperation and coordination with one another. It's difficult. There's no question. It's difficult because you have a 24-hour news cycle, 7 days a week, constant stream of this guy going over that guy. It's not serious, though, Corey. It's all hyperbole. It's all baloney, if you will. I mean, it's just... You
could say bullshit, by the way. I got the explicit rating.
Good.
I won't fine you a quarter, by the way.
I may have to say it. But that's the way that we used to do it. We are not going backwards. Unfortunately, we're already through the wormhole here. Okay, so whatever we're seeing now has altered and changed the course of things going forward. The last president, January 6th, you name it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But still true, as you mentioned, so many of the biggest things that have happened because of cooperation on both sides of the aisle. And as much as people like or dislike Joe Biden, I have always, just in a radio interview this afternoon, before we got on to talking between the two of us, I said this, and I believe it to be true. He is one of the last chief negotiators on the globe. He is someone who has always tried to find the middle road. Now, was he super partisan? You bet. I mean, that's how you're a politician, right? But when it came down to getting in those rooms, those smoke-filled rooms, they're no longer smoke-filled, but those rooms together where you have to get things done, Senator Joe Biden was always a guy who found a way to work on both sides of the aisle with his colleagues to try to get big things done. And until we get back to a time when we can do that, we're not going to see big things happen. That's why people are complaining about the fact that the Affordable Health Care Act, nobody's happy about the way that came together. Nobody's happy about that because it was partisan. There's a lot of partisanship that has happened over the course of the last 10, 15 years that has not made for better policy. And so the faster we can get back to a place where we work together, the better off we all would be.
Yeah, for sure. Now, okay, so here's my less than serious question. So I had one TV media hit on C-SPAN, but I have yet to be invited back. Would I have a better shot if I shaved the beard and cut my George Washington ponytail off?
I don't know that matters anymore. It used to matter. It used to absolutely matter. C-SPAN and all of those other networks. I think the one piece of advice I can give anybody is that when they call you to check in to see if you can do their show, as long as it's possible, say yes.
Yeah.
The more often you can say yes, the more often they're going to call you back. And that's something that I tell everybody. Clients that say to me, why don't I do more TV? I say, well, the last 3 times I told you that they wanted to talk to you, you said you weren't available. And not that you weren't available because you were traveling somewhere important and doing something big. It's just, it wasn't a good time for you. If you want to be asked to do TV, if you want to be asked to do radio, if you want to be doing more media hits, you need to say yes whenever they check in. And also check in with the producers that you know, just to say, I've got some new stuff coming up, or let me know if I can be helpful. Try to find a way to get a wedge between what it is you're talking about into what the daily narrative is too, because they're always trying to build on whatever's happening in the broader, whether the president's making an announcement, whether there's something happening on Capitol Hill, whether there's a major news, something that's going on in Texas or California or otherwise. The best way to find yourself into their regular orbit is by checking in with them from time to time, just to say, I'm here. I'd love to be helpful to you where I can.
Yeah. I want to build on that for a second. There's a lot of young folks in their early 20s, just, starting their careers, who Gen Z is just really cynical about a lot of institutions, a lot of professions, especially when it comes to politics and journalism and these overlapping trajectories that you have been dealing with for your career. What would you say to young folks just coming out of school, just starting to make their way, whether it is to encourage them or to edify them, to help to bring some fresh perspectives to start to make their way in a constructive way in these careers?
Well, the first thing I'll say is don't get frustrated. If you have an interest in making a difference, sometimes just being in the room is the first start. Taking notes, learning from others, and not being afraid to take that low-level job, whether it's grabbing phones or being in the room. I took those jobs over and over and over again, but through those early opportunities, I learned so much about how to be a grown-up in the room. Also, too, though, nothing is going to change unless we start listening to the generation behind us and 2 generations behind us. As much as we, complain about the millennials or the Gen Zs or about, the truth of it is that we are going to leave this globe to them. So we better start listening now because they'll have some brighter and smarter ideas.
Yeah.
And I think that the best organizations I see here in my city are the ones that are taking time to invest in young people, giving them a seat at the table, asking them to be part of the conversation, asking them for ideas about what's working. Because let's face it, we're not just talking to the senior citizens anymore in terms of voters. The voters are everywhere. They're young, they're middle-aged, they're retirees. And we need to figure out a way to talk to all of them that is resonating so that we can be, that the democracy can continue and that we can be successful.
Yeah. Along those lines, do you see any possibility of the fever breaking? Do you see the possibility that maybe the center will hold and reemerge, or are things only going to get worse and maybe not necessarily get better?
I talked to, and I can't call, this is not my own original research. I have had and heard some of these things that I'm about to share with you, but I also had a great conversation with a pollster that's coming up on the show in the next couple of weeks. And I asked him this question myself. I said, I'm under the impression that because in general, as you see in polling, no one's really happy with who the 2 frontrunners are today. And it is very likely that those are going to be the 2 candidates that are going to be on the ballot. And because of that, because neither one of them really stands out as a standout, really smart and like a candidate that everybody can get excited about, everyone's going to go really negative. 2024, the expectation is that it is going to be one of the most negative elections in our history. And it's mostly because if you can't hang your hat on a great legislative victory, on a great moment, on a great anything really, I can't think of anything over the course of the last 4 years that Joe Biden can say, I did that, and that's a big deal, and everybody's talking about it over the kitchen table. I don't see that happening. I know you don't either. Same is true for the former president. I'm not sure what in the world he would hang his hat on. There were a lot of good legislative and policy victories in that administration, but you can't get past the fact that everything is a distraction. The however many indictments, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to be really negative. But also, too, over the course of the last 6 to 8 years, we have seen record turnout in the polls. People on both sides of the aisle have been coming out and really been agitated and activated in terms of their voting. And that part of the electorate is exhausted. They're exhausted because they haven't seen change. I'm talking really about the middle class, and I'm talking about like lower middle class folks that really, really need government to work for them. And it's not. Those people have had just about enough. And it's more than likely, even though we're going as negative as it could be on both sides of the aisle, there's so much that's going to happen in 24. Those people are still going to be thoroughly fed up and probably not come out to vote. So that's another piece of it. So I do think that we're getting to a place when I think things are really coming to a head. And after we see what happens in 24, I pray and I hope that that means that we are going to get to a place where we can get back to getting work done and business done here in Washington, D.C. that does affect change for those people, those disenfranchised people that I mentioned, because it's about time that we do the job that we promised them we would do for them and get back to what folks have elected them to.
Now, I hear the informed passion in what you're saying, Lisa. Are you politically engaged yourself in any sort of partisan way, or is your interest more democracy itself? Like, where are you coming from?
After the last election, after 2020, for me, I put country over party. It is really hard for me to be rabidly Republican like I used to be, because so much of the narrative around the party has been so tremendously negative, so tremendously I don't even know if there's a word for what it is, except it's turned me off completely. And I am not alone. There are so many folks like myself who worked on political campaigns for Republican candidates for so many years that have really had to find a place to do work that doesn't necessarily depend on the election outcome, because it is tremendously frustrating. So to me, yes, I mean, I still am a registered Republican. I still do support Republican candidates. I work for Republican clients, and I love the work I do for them. But there are also some members of the party, super outspoken members of the party that I do not appreciate, I do not support, and I don't ever intend to, because I think that they're taking the party and the country in the wrong direction. Yeah,
I wrote my congressman, my U.S. congressman yesterday. He's a Republican. His Mike Garcia here in California, 27. It's one of the purplest districts in the country. More registered Republicans, but it's actually a Biden plus 12 district from 2020. And I wrote to him and I explained why it was imperative that he find some other Republican to vote for other than Jim Jordan. Listed a few reasons. But I said, here's, aside from those specific reasons, where my red line is, I'm actually supporting our Republican state Senate candidate, a lady named Suzette Valladares, because when I think of Suzette and what she stands for, the first thing that comes to mind is not how much she hates Democrats. There are so many prominent Republicans, locally, state level, at the national level, where the first thing that is that how you would describe them is how much they hate their opposition. That to me that's a bug, not a feature. And it's a bug, frankly, that I believe that we have to, and that's what this program is all about. We have to wipe away from, we want to be more of a virtuous democracy, not one where we're identifying people that happen to have a different letter before their name as worse enemies than Putin, as worse enemies than the terrorists who just bombed my family in my family's homes in Israel. And I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that. So I told Mike, I said, listen, the red line for me is democracy. The red line for me is the Constitution. And when you have, I don't know if you would agree with this, but when you have someone who literally sided with convicted insurrectionists, that's definitely on the other side of the line.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Do you know Garcia got a vote for speaker today?
Oh, Mike did? Good for him. Did he vote for himself? Or
I don't think so. I don't think so. The states that I saw that voted against Jordan were Nebraska, Oregon, Florida, Texas, and New York. And I only tell you that because the date stamp on today is that it's October 17th when we're having this conversation. And there is a debate now on the floor of the House representatives about who will be the speaker.
So the vote that went up at noon, you're breaking news for me right here, even though this is going to be released on Monday night. So Jordan didn't get the votes.
He did not on the first ballot. That doesn't mean he's not going to try again. He will try again. But I absolutely 1000% agree with what you said, Corey. And that is that democracy is the line. I mean, these members of Congress do not take an oath of office to the Republican or the Democrat Party. They take an oath to the Constitution. They are supposed to defend the Constitution. And that's what we've gotten away from with some of these fringy. I hate that people even call them conservatives. I think that they're radical.
It's not conservative.
Oh, absolutely agree.
If you've ever read Edmund Burke, if you've ever watched any of the debates that William F. Buckley had, even into his later years in the 80s and 90s, this is not a Burkean conservatism. It's not even a William F. Buckleyan type of conservatism, or even a fellow who's still writing and speaking today, Thomas Sowell. It's not any kind of conservatism that I'm familiar with. So I agree with you 100% there. So that's interesting. So now the folks at Punch Bowl, who I think do talk about great reporting. Yeah. Anna and Jake and their whole team over there, Brez, they do such a great job. If you're a geek about the Hill like I am, they do such a great job. We've had both Anna and Jake on the program, fortunately.
I've had Anna and I've had John Bresnahan on the show.
Brez is elusive. I'd love to get him on the show, but he's
who's elusive to me is that Jake Sherman, because he's so busy. Yeah. He's fantastic. Those guys are breaking so much news. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail you. But they're so fun to talk to. I love those guys so much.
Well, the reason that he's so hard to nail down is because he's doing old school gumshoe reporting. He's working the staff. He's working when he can get on the phone with an elected official. I mean, he's working the phones. He's working, the Hill. He's doing the work of actual reporting. Amazing. It's incredible.
Absolutely. And John Bresnahan has been on, he was elusive even when he was on Capitol Hill. Like I swear he was in the fabric of the curtains. I mean, you'd occasionally see him and it was like, oh, Fresh, what's up? And he's like, moving around. Amazing. And Anna, same thing. And Jake, I mean, those guys are awesome. And even the team that they've built there is tremendous. And
great young reporters with them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jake's assessment was that if he doesn't win it on the first vote, he's going to lose votes. Unlike what McCarthy did, where his first vote was, show me what the bottom of the barrel is. That's where I want my first vote to be. And then we'll build from there. Jordan's strategy is just the opposite. Bully people into, but if there's a number of people who are on the fence, a number of Republican elected House members who are on the fence, who if they see he goes down, they're going to come off in the second and third and fourth votes. I
think 20 was the number. I didn't see the final vote count, but last I checked, it was 20 voted against him.
Yeah. I mean, that's
McCarthy or for a variety of other people
Yeah. So my guess is that Congressman Garcia voted whichever way that McCarthy voted. So if McCarthy voted for Jordan, that's how Mike voted. He knows where his bread is buttered.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's a lot of that in this business.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that. I love the guys, the 20 that came out and voted, they voted their conscience. They were either former military officers, or they were they just fundamentally believe in democracy. And that's the one thing that I kept hearing over and over again, is that's a hard line for me. He was in favor of what happened in January 6th, and he's done a lot of other things that are counter to what our goals are. And so we're not for him.
Also presently, Ukraine. Ukraine is where the line in the sand is drawn, up until last week or a week and a half ago. That's the Middle East. There's a bulwark for democracy in Europe. Now there's a bulwark for democracy in the Middle East. And, it's time to put away partisan politics, when it comes to democracy, when it comes to the Constitution. So I have a couple other questions for you, and then we'll see if you have any questions for me. Sure. One is what I call the TP&R question, the talk of politics and religion without killing each other question. What do you think each of us can do to be better able to share space with? We've been talking about this. Share space with, have better conversations with, perhaps even nurture relationships with people across our differences. So that's people who think differently than we do, who have different beliefs than we do, who get their news from different sources than we do. How can we do better at talk of politics and religion without killing each other? Or is it even possible?
If you had asked me this question 2 weeks ago, I might not have had an answer, but you actually enlightened me about something that you had recently come upon. And I've actually been using it with my teenagers and some of the other folks that I work with every day. before you answer a question with your own opinion, think to yourself, I hadn't thought about it that way. Mm. And didn't you talk to someone not that long ago that gave you that advice?
Moni Guzman. She has a great book.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I have to read it because honestly, like that's the one piece of advice that I've started using, even in my, when we're having an argument about how late the teenager gets to stay out, or who gets to get the car, or whatever the debate is of the day, because it's always a debate here in our house. I've stopped everybody to say, wait a minute, before you get all worked up about this, I want you to think about it from our point of view. And that actually, it just pauses people long enough to be able to have a conversation. I also think too, that anytime we can get together in a social setting without social media, without our phones, and really just generally have a discussion and a conversation, small group conversations, I think that really does make a difference. Being able to talk it out. How do you see it from your point of view? How do you see it from your point of view? We used to do that all the time growing up, over the dinner table. And it's gone away because organized sports keep us out long after we're supposed to be home having dinner with our families. And people are not sharing. They're not sharing those conversations over the dinner table anymore. And I look back to like the good old days when we did that. But I also think too, that the less we talk, the more we're on our phones, head down into the tablet, the less likely we are to look up and say, why do you think that way? And then respond with, I hadn't thought about it that way.
Right.
So you actually shared with me a piece of advice that I have actually been using, I think, and I will continue to use, because I do think, and I can't wait to read Manny's book, because I really do think that that's a great way to start off a conversation.
Yeah, she's an encouragement. Monica Guzman, she's been on the program, and Moni and I have stayed in touch through the organization, the Braver Angels, which is actively trying to get people together across their differences. I had a conversation with my oldest kid, Savannah, a few days ago, because I saw that Savannah seemed to be advocating for a position that was anathema to me, frankly. After the bombings and the war broke out in Israel, our family there is literally under attack, and her contemporaries, the kids, are, I think there are 8 of them altogether from our cousins there that are actively engaged. Been called up to reserves, a medic, a drone pilot, a fighter pilot, front lines. Wow. And Savannah seemed to be advocating for one of the narratives, which is the framework of colonizer, anti-colonialist. I don't know if you've seen this apartheid type of a deal.
Yeah.
So it frankly, it really bothered me because it's like a version of presentism, but in a geographic sense. And it's really the wrong framework. So just to give a little bit of background, part of our family ended up there. My cousins ended up making what's called Aliyah. So they moved to Israel in 1979 from here. But other parts of the Blicks and the Kravals and the Kleinfelds and the Merticks ended up in what's now Israel after World War I, after World War II, as refugees. Whether it was refugees, the Merticks and the Kleinfelds who were left in Eastern Europe, Romania and Poland, refugees who there's few survivors of the Holocaust, the ones that came after World War I. I've told the story many times where it's, the Bolsheviks were fighting the Tsar's army were fighting the Cossacks, but the one thing they all could agree on was they all hated the Jews. So the place where my family had lived in Cherny Ostrov, Ukraine, for history tells us it was probably about 800 years, had to leave everything they had, everything they knew for all those generations. Some sought refuge here in the States, in Newark and in Brooklyn. Other parts of the family ended up going south and east to what's now Israel. They didn't go as colonizers. They went with literally what they could, the clothes on their back, and that was it. That does not a colonizer make. So anyway, I bring it up because I had this conversation with Savannah, and in a conversation like that, I could tell her tell them how it is, but it was a much more fruitful conversation because I wanted to hear what Savannah was thinking and what her concerns were, what her questions were, what her objections were. We had a fruitful conversation, and for somebody like me, I could come about it in a narcissistic way. Where I'm right and you're wrong, and here's the time where you need to agree with me, otherwise you'll continue to be wrong. that's not fruitful and it's not persuasive and it doesn't nurture my relationship with my oldest kid. But I had maybe one or two. Have you thought about this? You know, just like she had one or two with me. You know, let me gently posit that. You know, and she you know, they gave me a couple things to think about. So anyway, I apologize for babbling on. But as folks know, I've done a few special episodes about this and more to come. This is very close to home.
I think it's also too, I love that you say that you need to let our kids talk, because they do have thoughts and they don't necessarily need to have the same thoughts as us. I think that also too, that's a trap that we fall into, especially in the US, where we see that the perpetuation of racism, the perpetuation of anti-Semitism, the perpetuation of you name it, ism, can come from our parents, can come from their thoughts, and can come from our or the people that we surround ourselves with. And so as we were talking at the end of last week, there was some discussion about encouraging kids to maybe stay off of social media in general, because there was some discussion about how Hamas was going to be using that as another sort of emotional weapon, if you will, to make some other poor choices that we don't need to get into here on this show. But I did say to my oldest son, I said, as you digest this and you learn more about what's going on in the Middle East, I want you to pause before you just reactionary. And he typically does. He's very smart about the way he does social media, but I said, I want you to pause before you comment. I want you to pause before you share, because there are a lot of sides to this conversation. And it's one that I think that affects a lot of your friends and your family too. We are in our family are Christian, but we have so many personal family friends. I mean, we hosted Rosh Hashanah at my house 2 weeks ago for my best friend who was in town from New Jersey, who paid me with bagels, by the way.
That is awesome.
But I said that, but I think too, that having those conversations and talking to your children like they are also thoughtful people encourages independent thought and encourages conversation that I think really needs to be happening in households all across the country.
The most successful victories strike me as upside down victories. You know, I was just having this conversation. Jesus's path to victory was through the cross. He could have snapped his fingers, brought the most powerful army in the world to, you know, under his command. And, you know, a victory could have been, after all, he was, you know, God, you know, he was God among us, Emmanuel, right? But no, his choice, his path to victory was through the cross, through death itself. You know, there was another guy that we were talking about in the same conversation, Daryl Davis. I don't know if you've ever heard of Daryl. He's a great musician and he crosses different genres. He's a blues and jazz and country. I happen to be African-American, and he was playing, I want to have him on this program. We aired an interview he did on another show that I did. And he was playing at a country bar, and this guy from the KKK came up to him either during a break or after the show. And he said, hey, you know, I don't like you. You're subhuman, but I like your music. And Daryl goes, oh, that's cool. Let's have a beer. And he's from the KKK. Like, Daryl didn't know that. Like, he just knew that you're subhuman, kind of talked to him hatefully. He's like, yeah. The guy from the KKK goes, and he was like a grand wizard, big guy. Like, he goes, don't you know who the hell I am? He's like, well, now I do, but that's cool. Let's have a beer. You know? Yeah. And Daryl built a relationship with him over time to where he finally renounced his membership in the KKK. To this date, Daryl's done that over 200 times. Wow. So he loved the hate out of them. It was just incredible. So he's got an incredible story. I've already, I feel like I've indulged myself too much with my own stories here.
They're so good. And I think that too, though, Corey, it goes back to my original point and why I got into this business in the first place. Political communication is to work with people, hear people out, right? I mean, if we talked less and listened more, we'd all be better off.
Yeah. So I'll listen more. This is another question I have for you with the Friday Reporter and or your career overall. What's next for you?
Wow. Well, that's a great question. That's like asking me what I want to be when I grow up. And I'm not sure I know the answer to that. But I will say this. I love doing this show. And it's not my job. it's a passion project. I do it because I love it. I love having conversations with people like you and my colleagues that work in journalism. So the other thing that I am working on, I'm working on obviously building the show, but I also am building a platform for training and for performance for people who want to be better public speakers, for folks who want to know how better to talk to the media. So you asked a question about whether you should shave your beard or those kinds of things. There are hundreds of people that want to know the answer to those kinds of questions. They can't necessarily afford to hire themselves a personal trainer to help them be better at public speaking or better at doing TV, but they want to do more. And so my hope is to build a stable of basically shelf-ready training to help folks understand how to be better, authentic speakers. And my hope is to call it the Authentically Speaking series by the Friday Reporter.
Oh, great. So we'll give you a chance before we wrap to make sure folks know how to follow you. But before we get, and that'll also be in the show notes, but before we get to that, do you have any questions for me?
I want to know how you got into this podcasting business. How did you learn how to do it?
So when I was still in New York, when I was a kid, I produced some theater in New York. Mm-hmm. When I first moved out here in the mid 90s, I continued producing theater in LA, but also got into a little bit of independent film. And over the years, I've continued producing. So I'm not an Apple guy. I'm not an iPhone guy. I'm what do you call it? What's the other one? Android guy.
Android, yeah.
So it took me a little bit longer to figure out how to listen to a damn podcast. I've been hearing podcasts for years. So about 5 years ago, it was almost exactly this time of year. I think it was 2018. Yeah. I finally heard my first podcast and I was just blown away. I think it was a Mark Maron podcast. And I loved the medium. I loved how great of an interview. He has a certain style of interviewing, but just fantastic conversations nonetheless. And my producer hat kicked in. Yeah. And I immediately started to think about what kinds of stories we could tell uniquely, in a unique way in this medium. What kinds of conversations we could have. So one that I'd been dying to tell for a long time is the history. I have some business and entertainment. And one part of the entertainment industry that's really not well known is entertainment advertising, the coming attractions and the movie posters. So it's this series is actually coming back. It's called Trailer Geeks and Teaser Gods, about the greatest coming attractions of all time and the crazy people who made them, and the movie posters, and now the digital work. So we did that for 2 years, and it's how I learned the medium. I was partnered with a studio called DG Entertainment. They helped me understand sound better. I had a lot of friends in the industry, many of whom owe me favors, that are editors and post-production people who taught me the post-production side, and marketers, some of the greatest marketers in the world, to figure out how to connect with an audience and build an audience. So I'm not smart enough to have planned it all that way, but to learn all the different aspects of doing a show, recording a show, post-production on a show, marketing a show, but all the people in the entertainment advertising world sort of came together, and I learned a lot about the different aspects that I needed to know. And then in 2020, a little bit before you started the Friday Reporter, really I felt adept enough in the medium to start thinking of other stories that I was passionate about. I had just read David Brooks's not the newest book, the one before that, called The Second Mountain. And I was at an age where I was starting to think, what's really important to me? What's the second chapter? We're not old, but we're not young. So what do I feel like I can contribute to Tikkun Olam, to healing the world, to making the world a little bit better in my own little tiny speck of the corner of the world, right? And it was figuring out for years, more than any particular issue or any particular politician, for years, it's been figuring out how to talk to each other better, figuring out how to understand sort of a togetherness, remembering that we're all members of a human community. We're all members. So remembering people, right? And how to do it better. And that's this show. That's Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other.
I love that. And it's part of the reason why I started having conversations with journalists, because I felt like they were, they're not combat correspondents, they're not warfare correspondents, wartime correspondents. They're covering politics. Yeah. But more and more they're getting assaulted by the audience. They're getting assaulted by people that don't agree with them.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was super unfair.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think both of you both you and I arrived to this medium in a way that we wanted to affect change, even if it's just, the butterfly effect, whether it makes a small impact or a big impact, we'll never really know in our lifetime, but I absolutely love it. So my last question for you, Corey.
Okay.
What are you listening to now? Is there a podcast that you're listening to now that you like that you can recommend to me?
My absolute favorite podcast is this podcast. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, called The Friday Reporter.
Brownie points for you, friend.
If I open up my library here, it's diverse. So okay. Marin is on there. I'll listen to him about once a week. The Mets, I got to get my share of Mets.
Absolutely.
I start my day with the Mets. I just have to it's like a palate cleanser,
I love it.
But also plenty of politics. The ones that I like are ones that are either politicians, journalists, lawyers that come from a different perspective than I do. Like one of my favorites, frankly, is the one that David French and Sarah Isgur do called Advisory Opinions. I learned so much about the law. Mm-hmm. They're real conservatives, but they're more conservative than some of my inclinations. But I've learned so much about the conservative legal movement, and specific Supreme Court cases, and now all the different cases against Trump, but in a very even-handed, academic, erudite way. So that's definitely one of my favorites. But yours, I'm not kidding. I'm not blowing smoke up your. Like you really are doing God's work. Because you're right. Journalism as a profession is under attack, quite literally. Yeah. So for folks to simply celebrate good reporters and good reporting and journalism as an institution, I think it really is such important work. You do it in a fun, lighthearted, relational way, and it's really easy to approach. So along those lines, how can folks follow you, find more information about the Friday Reporter and this upcoming series, this edifying series that you're going to be doing, and all the great work that you're doing?
The Friday Reporter. You can find me at fridayreporter.com is the website. I'm on all the platforms, Apple, Spotify, you name it. Where you get your podcast, you can find the Friday Reporter. But also, too, if you have ideas for the show, or if you have a journalist that you love listening to that you think should be a guest, you can find me, Lisa at fridayreporter.com.
Awesome. Okay. So since two brilliant minds both told me this when I asked their advice, that I should ask this. It was Barb McQuaid, another great legal mind, and Monty Guzman, who we've already talked about. They both encouraged me when I asked for constructive criticism. They said, ask, is there anything important I forgot to ask you?
I can't think of a thing. This was so fun. I can't think of anything you haven't asked. I seriously can't think of a single thing, Corey. I love this conversation. This was so fun. But I promise that I will follow up with you. And I should also let your listeners know that if you haven't already heard Corey as a guest on my show, Corey will air this coming Friday before this show airs, because if this is airing next week. So Friday
That's the 20th? Yeah, the 20th.
20th of October.
That is awesome. Well, Lisa, I felt like I'm at home. Like we found a diner on Route 88 in Bricktown somewhere, and we hung out, had some fries and the Happy Waitress special, and we just enjoyed each other's company for an hour.
Thank you so much. This was so fun, Corey. Thank you. I wish you continued success in your show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for doing this. And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember, subscribe, rate, review, and tell somebody about the show, and argue with them, and argue about how wrong I am, and all that good stuff. It's all part of doing this thing better, figuring out how to have these important conversations in a better way. You can always find me online at Corey S. Nathan. That's Corey with an E and S as in Sam, at Corey S. Nathan. Now, go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.